we are hosting Candidates Night this evening for candidates running for the 27th Senatorial District, which encompasses Darien and parts of Darien and Stamford. Before I introduce our moderator, I just wanted to thank you all for coming and joining us on this new venture of a Zoom Candidates Night. The League of Women Voters is characterized by its nonpartisan policies and as they apply to politics. And we would also like to ask that during the evening, you not show any form of campaign literature or campaign buttons or any other paraphernalia that promotes your campaign, so that we can continue with our nonpartisan approach to politics. This evening's moderator is Jean Rabineau. We have had Jean as a moderator for several events in the past. Jean is currently the one of the registrars of voters in Trumbull, Connecticut. She has been an office manager for the League of Women Voters. She is an attorney, and she has been part of many boards and won several awards. So Jean, we would like you to be able to begin the debate. First, though, I'm going to introduce the candidates. I will try to do in alphabetical order: Joshua Esses, Brian Merlin, and Pat Billy Miller. Thank you all for coming again. And Jean, I'm going to turn the evening over to you.
Thank you, Clara. The rules are very simple. Each candidate will be given a 1-minute opening statement, and then each candidate will have a total of 15 minutes to answer all of the questions which have been submitted beforehand. They can take as long or as little time on any question as they would like. At the end of the evening, each candidate will get a 1-minute closing statement. Names were drawn out of a hat to determine the order in which the candidates would respond, so that the first opening statement will go to Mr. Esses first. Mr. Esses.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Josh Esses, and I'm running to represent you as our next state senator from Stamford and Darien. I'd like to thank both Representative Miller and Brian Merlin for joining me tonight, and I look forward to an engaging discussion about the future of our state. I'm running for state senate because I love Stamford and Darien, and I think we have a bright future ahead of us if, and here's the if, Hartford gets out of our way. That means changing the current narrative from one of taxation to one of growth. It means doing right by the businesses and families and school children that have been impacted by the coronavirus. And it means getting our pension situation under control. I grew up in Stamford, graduated from our public schools, and returned home after law school to start a life here in our community. There's no place I'd rather live and raise a family. As your state senator, I will empower Stamford and Darien to thrive. I think we desperately need new voices in our state government, and I will be that new voice for Stamford and Darien.
Thank you. Ms. Miller.
Thank you, Jean. Good evening. My name is Pat Billy Miller, and I have the honor of being able to run for the 27th District Senate seat. You are looking at a person where the odds were against her to succeed, a person who through resilience and hard work is able to stand before you this evening. It is the ability to overcome challenges that I brought with me to the General Assembly as a representative and will continue to bring as your state senator. During my 12 years in the legislature, I have always been a fierce advocate who elevates the voice of my constituents. COVID-19 has hit the people of this state hard, and we are hurting. We have experienced so much loss, and it's time that we be given hope to know that there is not just a light, but a bright light at the end of the tunnel. Stamford and Darien need someone like me who has a proven record of getting results for her constituents. Someone who is honest and can be taken at their word. Someone who will roll up their sleeves to better serve their constituents. We need to invest in our communities and our people to come out of these difficult times and come out even stronger. Thank you to the League of Women Voters
Ms. Miller,
for hosting.
Sorry. All right, Mr. Merlin.
Hey everyone, thank you for having me here. I'm running because last year I was offered Coronavirus CARES Act funds to drop out of the election as Narcan. I was also offered a meeting with Connecticut Chief State Attorney Colangelo on arresting the Sackler family, which are the owners of Purdue Pharma, who are responsible for the opioid crisis. I don't think public health funding should be dependent on me rigging elections for the Democratic Party. I know that these backroom deals are consistent and persistent within the Democratic Party, and it's truly problematic and leads to bad policies. I've posted these recordings publicly. You can see some short excerpts here. I've also posted them in full because I believe in transparency. And I think it's about time that our party answers for the opioid crisis, for Purdue Pharma, and for why no one on any level of government is fixing the problem, saving my dying friends. I lost 2 friends last year, and I'm emotionally attached to this issue, as well as the other issues confronting Stamford. I survived cancer. I grew up with parents who were disabled, and I truly care about the social safety net. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. Thank you all three. The first question starts with Ms. Miller. What is your opinion on the proposed mansion tax on properties valued over $430,000?
So living in Fairfield County, we know that $430,000 is a family that lives, a middle income family that lives in a house in a district that's similar to mine, where there's a high concentration of poverty. So as we've done with a lot of legislation that comes forth, it's a conversation. It is a conversation. It's a conversation that I will have with leadership, because that bill or that concept would negatively impact the people, not only in Stamford and Darien, but in Fairfield County. So it is a conversation that I will have, but that is my position, that the proponent of the bill is trying to figure out ways to raise money. But I do understand that I have to represent the people of this district, and the voices that I've heard thus far is against it.
Okay, Mr. Merlin, mansion tax?
I believe that we need to be more focused on bills like right to counsel, because I'm more concerned with those who are teetering on eviction personally than worried about wealthy property owners. I know it's not the most popular thing to say, but the reality is Fairfield County does fairly well. It's basically the Beverly Hills of the East Coast. I live in an apartment. There were 116 tows in only the most vulnerable communities in Stamford recently during these initial 2 storms. I don't know how many happened in the 3rd storm, but the point is the vulnerable are targeted, and I'm not necessarily so worried about homeowners per se compared to renters who are teetering on eviction. And I think it's truly important to focus our policies more so on the vulnerable than focus it on people who are perhaps more middle class and more well off in this terrible, public health situation. And I really think that we should try to, care about the vulnerable and focus policies on that rather than necessarily worry about those who are still able to pay for rent or pay for mortgages right now.
Okay, Mr. Esses?
Thank you. This is an easy question. I am opposed to the new statewide property tax, which would affect middle-class homeowners, starting with homes of an assessed value of only $300,000. It would affect business owners as well as it affects commercial property. It's a regressive tax. It will increase the cost of living, and rest assured, if implemented now, it will only go up both in the mill rate and in the dollars taxed in the years forward. I've been very clear on this issue, and I can't resist pointing out that when presented with a clear opportunity to stand against this proposal, Representative Miller said only that it's a conversation. So the door remains open for this property tax for Representative Miller, and I hope voters take that into consideration when they go to the polls on March 2nd.
Okay, thank you all three. Next question goes to Mr. Merlin first. What is your opinion on state efforts to increase diversity of housing using zoning laws and/or eminent domain?
I absolutely believe in diversifying housing and affordable housing. And I think that we need to focus on this issue because I know that Connecticut is one of the most segregated states in the country. I know that we have deep-rooted and deep-seated problems on these issues, and I definitely support it and hope that we can do anything overall to help fix the systemic racism and systemic problems within our own community. You know, we have people who are killed during mental health calls. We have people who are killed by police all over Connecticut, and we have policies that specifically only focus on targeting the socioeconomically vulnerable. And I believe that between that and the way that people who worked on the police accountability bill have been targeted, and the way that police brutality bereavement groups have been targeted, is truly unfortunate, because I've seen some horrible things as far as what's going on basically with this. And so I think that we need to focus on protecting the vulnerable, because I see a lot of systemic racism problems, and it has to do with mental health, with issues around substance use disorder. I know that half of our prisoners, rather than half of our overdoses, are recently released prisoners. And so, you know, there's truly deep-seated problems when it comes to issues around race, even within Connecticut. And I know that it's very uncomfortable to talk about, particularly when we don't seem to have progress on any of these issues.
Mr. Esses?
I'm opposed to the use of eminent domain to create housing or other new projects. More likely than not, the experience of eminent domain is that it targets minority and underprivileged communities to make way for others. And look no further than the multifamily home on Pulaski Street in Stamford South End that the city has tried for years to seize for eminent domain, and which a minority family owns. More generally, as to the question of a statewide taker of zoning laws, I think the government that governs best is the government that governs closest to the people. You know, one of the reasons that people move to Stamford and Darien is because they like the community, they like the beauty, and they like the amenities that each of these towns and cities have to offer. Whether you like the bustle of multifamily of Stamford's downtown, where I happen to live, or you enjoy the backwoods of Darien or other parts of Stamford, where you can have a really nice space and a wonderful quality of life, I think it's important that we provide that diversity for all of our state's people. And I want to make sure that that diversity remains. I say, let 1,000 flowers bloom, let the communities decide for themselves what we want to do. And if we want to make housing more affordable in the state, let's not impose a statewide property tax. Okay, let's reform the labor agreements that drive up the cost of living for everyone, and let's make it cheaper for developers to build.
Okay.
Thank you, Jean. Eminent domain, I agree with my Mr. Esses that eminent domain does impact middle income families as well as low income families. And so I personally do not believe in eminent domain. I think that there's a shortage of housing and a shortage of open space, and people have nowhere to live. Housing is expensive, so it's almost impossible to find a home that's comparable. As far as the state overriding local rule, I truly believe that the local government are closest to the problem, and that they know exactly what their community needs. However, if that imposes on other people where there's no equity, then I have to disagree with it. If the state government, which should not intervene, if the local government would make housing equitable for individuals in that community. And that's what I found that has happened across the state. When we look at 830G, where there are communities that will not participate or fulfill their obligation on 830G. Housing cannot be, we can't continue to let housing be in communities where there are high concentrations of poverty. I think, and our President of the United States just issued an executive order about this very thing, about looking at the racial equity in all of our policies and laws. And he applied it to government agencies. And I think state and local government should do the same thing, that we look at our policies and our laws, look for the equity for policies and laws that we have in our cities and our states. So it's impossible for me to sit here today and to say that I do not believe in racial equity, because I do. But I think that what we need to understand as a society, that we have to come together, and we have to come together, and we have to look out for one another. I just want to say one thing, that as a child growing up in poverty, it was very difficult for me to take a school bus every day going through neighborhoods that had homes that were a lot better than mine. I think that students should have the opportunity, children should have the opportunity to grow up in those communities where there are better school systems and better amenities. Thank you.
All right, thank you all three. The next question will go to Mr. Esses first, and it is, since tolls are out of the governor's proposed budget and the special transportation fund is nearly empty, how should the state fund repairs to our roads, rails, and bridges? Mr. Esses.
I'm glad to see that tolls, for the most part, is no longer on the table in our state, although there have been Democratic senators that have proposed yet again another tolling bill. I think the people understand that the state government is not a good steward of our money and is not going to do a good job using the tolling money for necessary improvement in our infrastructure. I think the things we can do to improve infrastructure are, first, reform project labor rules in the state of Connecticut that drive up the cost of transportation. We are one of the most expensive places in the country to do transportation work. The second thing we need to do is we need to reform a law known as the Municipal Employees Relations Act, which imposes binding arbitration upon municipalities when they contract with public sector labor unions in their city. These agreements drive up costs for the municipality, and it squeezes out monies that would otherwise be spent on transportation. And look no further than the city of Stamford, where every single year, mayors of both parties try to put in millions of dollars for things like road paving, which every resident wants, but always gets cut at the last second because healthcare costs and retiree costs and labor costs take up the budget, and they don't want to impose too large a tax increase. So we need to focus not only with reform at the state level, but we also need to empower our municipalities to have greater freedom in labor contracts, so there's more money for all of the other things that citizens want.
Okay, Ms. Miller?
Thank you, Jean. So the governor has two initiatives in his budget that I agree with. One is to impose a mileage tax on trucks, and the other is the multi-state transportation climate initiative that is supposed to bring in billions of dollars. We have to do something. Tolls are off the table, but I want everyone to be clear that our transportation fund is insolvent and as of 2024-25, and we have to do something to make sure that our infrastructure is modernized and that people can get back and forth to work. Do I agree that changing our bargaining unit agreements will help things? I don't think so. I think that if management did what they're supposed to do, then you wouldn't need unions. These are men and women who during the crisis from 2009 to date have given up their raises. They've had price freezes, their wages frozen three times, that they've been good partners. They've been good partners. And we've opened up the CBAC agreement in 2011, 2009, 2011, 2017. And in the 2017 CBAC agreement, guess what? According to the office of the comptroller's office, we saved $1.7 billion in FY18 and FY19. So I'm saying that unions eliminating or changing our union contracts at this point is not necessarily answered. But I can tell you this, that the people of this state, the employees of this state, have kept this state going and functioning during COVID-19. Thank you, Jean.
Thank you. Mr. Merlin?
I strongly support every union other than the police union. I should definitely mention probably. And I think that, you know, it's important to not deprive people when everyone is struggling, when so many people are at risk of eviction, when so many people are, like me all last year, putting their health insurance premiums on their credit cards while checks aren't necessarily coming in. We need to help people. And the last thing, we should do is be trying to take food off people's table when it comes to these contracts. I think that there's other ways to generate revenue. For instance, we have this local evil company that's wired $11 billion almost to Swiss bank accounts. Perhaps we could pierce the corporate shield on this and retrieve some of this fraudulently transferred funds, like I've gone on about at great length for years now, as well as, get the prosecutions we deserve since there were real crimes. But the main thing is there's other sources of revenue. Another thing you could do is legalize marijuana. I happen to be a cancer survivor, so I have a legal prescription, so this is legal. And, I know we're deriving a lot of state revenue from this, and strange enough, you could still use it and get on a congressional ballot, so, I think maybe it's time to legalize with equitability and growers' rights and definitely expungements and bring in the revenue we need while denying the black market this kind of revenue. And that's about it.
Okay, thank you all three. Next question, we'll start with Ms. Miller. There are two bills before the General Assembly, one to create early voting, SJ3, and one to allow for no excuse absentee ballots, SJ4. As our state senator, how would you vote on these bills and why?
As your state senator, I would vote yes on both of them. In fact, I've supported those bills. The reason why I think that early voting is important, as well as no excuse absentee voting is important, because it gives individuals who have been marginalized and disenfranchised the opportunity to vote. The last general election that we had proved how effective no excuse absentee voting is. We had historic records, historic numbers come out to vote. It's convenient for individuals where there's a flexibility, but most of all, it gives everyone access to the democratic process and giving them an opportunity to let their voices be heard. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Merlin.
I believe in access, and it's strange enough, it's not necessarily only voting access that is the problem. I know that these primary deals that I experienced are well established within the Connecticut Democratic Party. I'm aware of other deals, like for instance, I have some incumbent friends. I don't necessarily want to ruin their careers and say their names right now, but basically they were told they wouldn't be on party flyers unless they voted for Tong over Maddie. And I have huge issues with this because that is a very important office. And so the concern is it doesn't create safe spaces for women also in the Connecticut Democratic Party, because at a convention, a woman delegate was physically touched by a DCC chair. And when she complained, absolutely nothing happened, which is why she's not backing up my reportings right now on all the other admissions I got. But basically, I support early voting. I support voting by mail, because the problems are happening during the primary process. And, if you really want to see some nightmares, you should try running for office locally, because it's the wild, wild west.
Okay, Mr. Esses.
Thank you. I want to touch on a point Representative Miller made, and then I'll get back to the question about voting. Representative Miller brought up the state public sector unions. I was talking about municipal unions, but either way, I'm glad she did. I'm not anti-union. I'm pro telling the unions the truth about what is going on in our state with respect to the pension and retirement benefits that we've promised them. One of the skill sets I bring to the table that I think both sides of the aisle would benefit from is my experience as a restructuring lawyer working on behalf of some of the largest both governments and companies to face insolvency issues and their pension funds. And what we're seeing happen in the state of Connecticut, it happened in the city of Detroit, where a bankruptcy proceeding wiped out billions of dollars of union member pension and retirement benefits. It's happened in other places as well. And we keep spending new money on new projects when we haven't made good on the obligations that we've already promised to the people of Connecticut and to their employees. Okay, I'm for honesty on this topic, and we need to shore up our pension fund, and deal with old liabilities before we jump into new programs. On the voting question, I guess I'll just speak generally here. Our democracy survives only when people have trust in the integrity of our elections. And when you open up early voting and absentee balloting, you increase the risk of fraud and just regular human errors in our elections. And look no further than Stamford this past November, when literally hundreds of absentee ballots were found in the city of Stamford 3 days after the election. That was a good faith mistake, and it didn't change the result of an election, but can you imagine if it had? Or ask Senator Moore in Bridgeport how she thought her mayoral primary against Joe Ganim went a few years ago, and if that was fair. We need the losers of elections to trust that the election was fairly won, and the best way to do that is to encourage in-person election day voting.
All right, thank you all three. The next question is going to start with Mr. Merlin first. And it is, between lower tax revenue and COVID expenses, more pressure than ever will be on our school budgets. In addition, both towns have traditionally been underfunded through educational cost-sharing grants from the state. As our state senator, what are your thoughts about providing equity in funding to our schools and helping all districts with COVID expenses?
I think it's definitely important to try to help our district. And I know that there's other issues beyond just the, general expenses of COVID with our mold problems, say locally. And, I think we really need to look at schooling hard right now, because I know there's a lot of multi-generational households. And I know that many people want to be there in person, but personally, as someone who recently lost their grandmother, I see stuff from both sides of the aisle on this, and I do have concerns. I believe that some of the equitability problem is because Fairfield County probably is so much better off compared to the rest of the state and also much of the country. And that it's probably, I would imagine, TIF agreements and stuff of that nature that are causing the fact that the financing is different. But, I will fight for the schools, and I think it's an important issue, but I also am very worried about safety. And I think that with the amount of liabilities with the public health in general, it's hard to ever have enough funding for any of this stuff. And it's a grave concern when it comes to protecting our children and protecting their families under this situation. I'll do anything I can to fight for financing always. And I think I've demonstrated that even while never winning an election. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Esses?
The federal government has appropriated billions of dollars across the country for coronavirus relief to be sent down to our states, and then our states to our cities and local school districts. And one of the things our state legislature needs to do is reassert its prerogative, its constitutional prerogative, as an equal partner in managing the affairs of the state of Connecticut. Now, what do I mean by that? The state legislature has once again granted our governor an extension of emergency powers. These emergency powers will run for over a year. And this could include decisions with respect to disbursement of federal coronavirus relief funds that Congress enacted and gave to the states. Stamford and Darien and these surrounding communities are always shortchanged when it comes to educational cost-sharing grants from the state. And unless we make our legislative voices heard through the Stamford and Darien delegation, that's going to continue to be the case. And I want to make sure we have a seat at the table and that we don't let the governor simply run the state's coronavirus relief efforts through the federal government by himself.
All right, thank you, Mr. Esses. Ms. Miller?
Thank you. The governor, yes, his executive powers were extended, but we talk about red tape all the time. If we hadn't extended the powers, the governor's executive authority, then it would have been difficult to get the services to the people of the state. So that's why we had to do that. As far as the federal government is a good character, a good force to be reckoned with. It is because of the federal government that we've been able to help our local budgets. And it's because of the federal government that we're going to have monies sent to these cities directly, not necessarily through the state. There will be a portion through the state, But this next round of funding will be sent to the schools, the cities directly, so that they can deal with their budgets, the underfunding of their budgets. So I agree that the executive order, it is difficult as a legislator, and I'll be honest with you, it's been difficult during this pandemic not to use my legislative powers to represent my people. But it was something that had to be done in order to get the services to our people. And so I want to thank the governor for all that he's done through this pandemic. Thank you, Jean.
Okay, thank you all. All right, the next question is going to start with Mr. Esses first. It is, racial equity is a topic that has been in the forefront of many constituents' minds in the last year. The state has an uneven track record, passing the Police Accountability Act last year, but has not conducted a formal economic disparity study for state procurement policies since 1992. What are your thoughts on the role of the General Assembly in promoting racial equity?
I think the most important thing we can do today in Connecticut to promote racial equity is to ensure that all of our state's school children can have 5 days of in-person education of any age. This is kindergarten through 12th grade. One of the things I fear that we're going to see in our communities, and we'll know more as the years go on, is the lack of education during the time that families and children have been forced to do school from home, part-time or even full-time. And I fear that these effects are going to be most felt on our underrepresented and less socioeconomically advantaged families who may not have the resources to bring in a tutor for extra time and who may not have the ability for one of the parents to stay at home and educate the children when the school isn't. I think the second thing that the state needs to do is provide more educational opportunities for these children. Take a look at the Stamford Charter School for Excellence. At the Stamford Charter School for Excellence, for example, which is an extremely high achieving charter school on Stamford's west side that educates a predominantly minority population. Now, when the Stamford Charter School for Excellence went to the State Board of Education, they're a K-5 school, and they wanted to expand to 6th grade because they're having so much success. The State Board of Education said, no, we'll let you expand to 6th grade, but you'll have to give up kindergarten in its place. That makes no sense to me. And it makes no sense to the families of children who have thrived there. And as your state senator, I will advocate for those families and I will advocate for those school choice so everybody can get the kind of quality education that I got as a graduate of Stamford Public Schools, who had the privilege of leaving Stamford Public Schools and receiving a finance degree from the University of Illinois and a law degree from Harvard. I want everyone to have those opportunities, and that's what I'll fight for in the state government.
Ms. Miller?
Yes, Jean, can you repeat the question, please?
Yes, absolutely. Racial equity is a topic that has been in the forefront of many constituents' minds in the last year. The state has an uneven track record, passing the Police Accountability Act last year, but has not conducted a formal economic disparity study for state procurement policies since 1992. What are your thoughts on the role the General Assembly has in promoting racial equity?
First of all, I want to piggyback on the last question in that I have fought for education. I have fought to get more dollars to Stamford since I've been in the General Assembly. And we have changed the formula that Stamford gets an extra $1 million each year. So we're getting there, we're making small strides. Racial equity is my position that every piece of legislation that comes to that floor should be looked at, the racial impact should be looked at. We have tried to have, I had heard part of the question was the inequity, the study. So we have tried to have that study done, the minority impact study done. But what has happened is we've been told, the proponents and I were told that it was too expensive. because we do know that in order to know about minority businesses, or to do something about minority businesses, to make sure that minority contractors can receive contracts and equal work and be treated fairly, is that we have to know exactly what that looks like. And so, yes, we do need to do a study. But racial equity is very important in this state, and especially in our schools. And that's something that I've been working on, making sure that every child in the state can read, making sure that every child has equal access to education. And so what we need to do is that my colleagues and I, and especially in the Senate, where I will have a stronger voice, is that we have to look at the racial impact of every piece of legislation that leaves that General Assembly. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Merlin.
Thank you for this question. I really appreciate the time to speak on this because I've worked very hard on these related issues as of this past year or so. I think we absolutely need to do that study on procurement. I think that in order to really make sure that everything's done properly, it's really important to do that study. But I also wanted to speak on equitability a little bit on Connecticut in general. I know that people have complained to me, since I'm, somewhat of a well-known complainer, if you will, publicly, about they've had deep consequences because of working on that police accountability bill, not just professional consequences, but, scary things, but like being targeted by the police, kind of like how they, put out bulletins on my silly little balloon events in front of Purdue Pharma and put out, targeting on me too. So I'm a little used to this at this point. But basically, the bereavement groups and the people who worked on this bill, they've been targeted because of their activism around BLM issues. And they complain to me privately. I know that some of the Connecticut Democrats are helpful and they represent some of the people who've been charged in some instances. But, they don't really help us until someone's charged, unfortunately. And you can't talk to Colangelo unless you drop out of an election. So it's kind of difficult to talk to the prosecutors, as my own experience has shown. And, I think there's really deep-seated problems with equitability, because I don't see people championing justice for Stephen Barrier, justice for Jason, justice for Kuda, justice for any of these groups, and Mubarak Salman. There's groups all over the state, and there's even people that don't necessarily have groups, and frequently these are mental health calls gone wrong. The last time I saw my own mother, she was removed by the Stamford police from a mental health call. And, I care deeply about these issues, and I've fought besides these families, and I hope to see more of the Connecticut leadership, no matter who wins the election, to fight along these side these families and these activists on racial issues. And I really appreciate the question, because I think it's important to speak to these local groups, and they're trying so desperately hard under very dangerous circumstances where they're actively being pursued and arrested by a relentless and evil police union. A Republican even told me just this week that the ammo budget in Stamford, the $250,000 ammo budget, is a secret discretionary fund. And so even on both sides of the aisle, people have deep-seated issues with the Stamford police. They hurt Jeray Eaton and attacked a crowd on August 8th in our district. And it was very disturbing how they did this. They had no regard for, who was doing what in that crowd. And the truth was, if they had waited 10 minutes, everyone was walking in their car anyway. I filmed all the events in Stamford, and none of the other events where we walked in the street was the crowd attacked by the police brazenly like that, or was there even complaints that we walked in the street. And it's ridiculous that people aren't speaking out on these issues, and we don't help these people until they're formally charged by Colangelo in this terrible situation. And so I really hope that people will champion these issues more. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all. The next question is going to start with Ms. Miller. It is, the state has two large pension obligations for the state employees and the teachers. What are your thoughts about how to handle these obligations and keep Connecticut's economy growing?
Thank you, Jean. Jean, to my opponent, Mr. Esses, I want to thank him for mentioning the Stamford School of Excellence, Charter School of Excellence, because I was very instrumental in getting that school in Stamford and getting the funding for that school. So thank you, and I'm very proud of the accomplishments that they've made, because they did exactly what I thought they were capable of doing. And so I want to thank you very, very much for that. So, I'm sorry, Jean, what was the question? I got so wrapped up in the other.
That's quite all right. This is the question on pensions. What?
Oh, the pensions, I'm sorry. I'm sorry about that. So
Yeah.
I just got so excited about the school because they've done such great things. So the pension obligations, the state, we've done a lot of great work in reforming our pensions, our pension liability. Pension systems, the teacher pension, if we stay on the track that we are, we'll be fully paid up to date in 2049. And then the state employees, it's around 2045 or so. We have made many reforms for the pension, for our pension system. We have changed the way that individuals are vested, moved it from 10 years to 15 years. We've created a hybrid 401k system. We've changed the qualification of receiving a pension from age 63 or 62 to 65. So those are the things or initiatives that we're taking and making to make sure that we bring down that unfunded liability. Because unfortunately, we had leaders that just kicked the can down the road, leaving it for someone else to take care of. And so my colleagues and I, for the last few years, have taken it by the reins, taken the horn by the reins, and tried to bring that pension, the liabilities, to a point that we can pay for it and that'll be solvent. Let me say this, that we made a $60 million payment. That was historic. We made a $60 million payment for our liabilities, towards our liabilities. And because of the initiatives that we put in place, we're able to save monies, that unappropriated funds, use those funds to go into the rainy day, use those funds that exceed our cap to pay for our liabilities, our unfunded liabilities. So thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Merlin.
People talk about pension liabilities. I think about reforms taking money off people's tables. I think about, families that need to retire. I think about families that got into careers to give back to the public because they expected to hopefully have a retirement of some kind, and how we're failing them when we, actively sabotage their savings. We call these people heroes, but at the same time, we sit here and we talk about the retirements as though they're liabilities. I don't think they're liabilities. I think that we need to help people, and we need to fight for pensions. We need to fight for unions. We need to do everything we can on these issues. I know that it's tough to figure out ways to pay for things, but if coronavirus and everyone, including myself, being from CARES Act money has shown us anything, it's that you could just keep printing it and do whatever you want with it, ethically or not. And I think that we need to focus on ethical policies, things that help the vulnerable. Overall, other countries provided for people during this time, and the US didn't. And I don't understand, we use coded words like socialism or all kinds of nonsense, but the Christian charity is pretty straightforward, similar to that coded word everyone thinks is so bad, which is trying to help people as well as, mitzvah, as well as alms, whatever your faith is, or even if you're not religious. I think we need to help people, and we shouldn't be talking about hurting people's pensions and hurting anyone at these difficult times. People are truly struggling, and we need to figure out some way to make it work. And I don't know, perhaps we could just drop out of some elections and it'll just rain like it would have for me, and I would have had a great political career and not even had to run against you guys right now. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Esses.
Here's what we need to do to protect pensions for all our public sector workers while making sure it doesn't drown out all the other things that our government wants to provide for its citizens. Remember, something like 30% of our annual budget at the state level is just pension service and debt service. That's not money going to productive purposes today. That's money that we should have saved for before. And while governors of both parties are certainly to blame for the accumulation of this 75 or so billion dollar pension and retirement benefit liability, the state legislature has been monolithically controlled by Democrats virtually for all of the past 30 years. So telling us that the Democrats are going to solve this problem, well, why haven't they solved it yet? First, I want to break pensions down into the teachers' pension fund and everything else, because the teachers are a special case. Okay, teachers in our city school do not receive Social Security, and they do not receive a pension from the city. The state provides those pension liabilities. The teachers' retirement system is something like 50% funded at this day. I hope we get it to 100% funded, and we need to restrain spending in other areas in the state to make sure that we protect and provide for them. As far as the other pension benefits for state workers and retiree health care benefits, here's how we reform them. First, everybody who's retired now gets every cent they've been promised. Everybody who's near retirement now gets every cent they've been promised. But for new employees and for beneficiaries in their younger years, we need to switch to a 401k style plan. That's what I get in my private sector job and what basically all private sector employees get today. We need to reduce or even completely eliminate retiree medical health care benefits provided to our state workers. We just can't afford them. This is in addition to Medicare and Medicaid and all of the other healthcare programs that exist. There's just not money for $20 to $30 billion of retiree healthcare benefits. And we need to reduce the gaming of the pension system by people running up salary and overtime in their final years of service, such that when you do the pension benefit calculation, they have artificially high pension numbers. Let's switch to 401k style plans for everyone. And that has the added benefit, because here's what's happened in other municipalities and governments that have faced pension issues, is one day you've got a pension and the next day you don't. If you give people the money in their account, the government can't steal it. The government can't squander it. It's yours, and you know it's yours because you see it every day. And this has happened too many times in Puerto Rico, in Stockton, California, in Detroit. I don't want it to happen here, but at the path we're going on, we may be there.
All right, thank you all three. The next question is going to go to Mr. Merlin first. And this one is, there has been a large influx of new residents into the district from New York due to COVID. What are your thoughts on how we can keep these new residents here in Connecticut once the crisis is over?
I think that these new residents will really enjoy Connecticut living, and that we'll all be shell-shocked for quite some time on what we just went through, particularly with the new variants and the concerns that I think we'll all have going forward, because none of us really know where this is going. I thought myself it would end by now. I'm sure many of us have. We've all been trying our best, but I think it's a scary situation, everything that's happening right now, and we're all just going to have to try to come together as a country and do our best.
Okay, Mr. Esses?
It's a great question, and it emphasizes the need for the state of Connecticut to change the conversation from one of all the creative ways we can tax you and then spend your money to one for how can we just grow the economy, and then you keep tax rates steady, but tax revenues go up. Okay? These people that came from New York City, and I'm glad they're here, they're not going to stay if they don't find Connecticut to be hospitable for families and businesses. And that doesn't mean the government has to give out tax subsidies or tax breaks or anything like that. Just send the message that Connecticut is open for business and open for families. And one of the ways that we can do that is by passing common sense regulations for new nascent industries like data sciences, technology, blockchain, cryptocurrency, and so on, to tell entrepreneurs and people that may want to start their lives here that there are rules and regulations that you'll play by. You'll understand how to form a business and operate in these new spaces. We'll protect you, we'll explain how the taxes work, and we'll protect the consumer so that there's predictability in your business. And again, this won't cost $1, but it'll send the message. And so much about recruiting people to come and stay is marketing and messaging. And for too long, the marketing and messaging from our has been one of taxing and spending, and I want to change it to one of growth and entrepreneurship. There's an incredible amount of both intellectual and financial capital in Stamford, in Darien, and our surrounding communities, Westchester, New York City. Let's grab those people. Let's bring them here. Let's tell them that Stamford and Darien and Connecticut are open for business.
Ms. Miller?
Thank you. I wanted to make it clear before I answer that question that the employees, the state employees, do pay into a health fund. I pay into a health fund. So I don't want our audience to think that the state employees are getting free health care, because they're not getting free health care. They do pay for their health care. So I just needed to make that clear. So when we saw a report a few months ago that more people have moved in Connecticut, and they moved in Connecticut because they wanted to be near their families and because of work. I've heard ever since I've been a legislator how bad Connecticut is. We're chasing people out. There must be something about Connecticut that's attracting people. I do believe that people are going to stay. I think that Corona has made all of us look retrospectively at our lives to see what's important. Yes, I agree. We have to do things to keep businesses here. We have to attract businesses. And that's where we have to work on economic growth, job creation, workforce development. I look at Semaphore, that's down on, it's in Stamford, it's on Southfield Avenue. That was a company that came here in 2017. They didn't flee. They used monies from Connecticut Interventions to build their company. They quadrupled their staff to 500 employees. Those are the kind of things, initiatives that we took years ago. At the last crisis, we made initiatives or created initiatives for companies to come to this state and stay. Jackson Labs. One of the things that we have to do, we have to improve our education system, and that's what I work on. We have to improve our education system. We have to make sure that we have capital, intellectual capital, so that individuals, companies will come here and stay. So we have to improve our higher ed system. We have to improve our elementary school system, because people with families, they want to bring their children to a state or go to a school where their children will be successful. So we're going to have to include our education system.
Okay. I'm afraid, Ms. Miller, that has exceeded just now your 15-minute cumulative time.
Thank you.
But thank you very much again, all three of you. This means that on the last question, and I believe this will be the last question, excuse me, that Mr. Esses will go first, and then Mr. Merlin, and then we will get to closing statements. So the last question is, affordable housing is always an issue in the district. And with the recent influx of new residents from New York and the loss of jobs due to COVID, there is a looming housing crisis. What measures, if any, would you take to deal with the crisis?
Oh, I think my answer to this question is going to touch on themes throughout the evening. We need to make sure that the cost of living in our communities is as low as it can be. And that means responsible municipal labor agreements. It means responsible tax and spending policy, both at our state capital and at our municipalities. It means getting rid of red tape and regulation that makes it hard for builders to build. And it means making sure that we have quality schools so that people can live in our communities and not feel the need to send their children to private school to get a good education. I don't think there's anything magical that the government needs to do here other than spend our money wisely, provide goods and services that the people want, and don't do things that our government isn't good at doing.
Okay, and Mr. Merlin.
I believe that part of the problem is, I know that both the state government as well as the municipality is subsidizing BLT to essentially go about gentrification of the area. And that, part of the reason we don't have affordable housing is because they're too busy building these luxury apartments. I know some of my Republican, hopefully one day colleagues, but right now I guess friends, they told me that the numbers are being cooked by BLT. And I think that this is, basically what's causing the crisis in terms of affordable housing. I myself feel this crisis. I don't own a fancy $1 million house or a Tesla. I have an apartment with a essential worker roommate, and that makes it a little more affordable, but even as an adult, it's difficult, particularly if you've had cancer like myself, or if you've grown up with parents on disability. One issue I wanted to always touch on is the asset limits on the Husky program make it a poverty trap. And so I remember when I was a kid, I saved up my paper out money, and when I got over a lousy $1,000, I lost my Husky insurance. And $1,000 won't get you a car, $1,000 won't pay for your first semester at any school, $1,000 won't really do anything for you. And so I think we really need to look at these are called stops and gaps within our existing programs, because I think a lot of our programs unfortunately function in this way, where they provide an incentive for people to not try as hard as I've had to pull themselves up by their proverbial bootstraps, if you will. And as far as affordable housing, we really need to provide help for the vulnerable, because I know, as someone who delivered food at Pacific House and Open Door Shelters for 7 months last year, 5 days a week during the coronavirus, we have a real housing crisis, and it's very difficult. My friends and I, we took over Latham Park, as some of you probably know, and people live there year round because we have deep-seated housing issues. And I think that it's important we speak on these, because we have a huge houseless community that's challenged locally. And I know we need to do something, because we were unable to provide people housing, even people who were living with us at Latham when we temporarily took it over once. Thank you.
Thank you. That's time.
Gene,
All right.
Gene, if I may, because I think I have a little time, I'd love to make a point that'll take 45 seconds on the coronavirus that we have.
You have time.
Great. Thank you very much. Just a quick point, really for the governor's consideration as much as anyone, who I think, I think he and his staff deserve a good deal of credit for ensuring a relatively orderly and efficient distribution of vaccines in the state. Some of you may have seen the governor recently released the schedule by which people of all ages are going to receive the vaccines. And I'd like to suggest one modification to that. I think it's essential that every person who's, call it above the age of 55 and has comorbidities, gets 2 doses of the vaccine as soon as possible. But once you've gotten past that point, once we're talking about the 55 and under group, I think it's better that you give 2 people 1 vaccine than 1 person 2 vaccines. That's a better way to herd immunity, and these single doses are like 80% inoculation rates.
Okay, and that's time also.
Thank you.
That's time. Thank you. All right, at this point, timers, we go back to the time statements. Each candidate is going to get a 1-minute closing statement. And by the luck of the rotation, the first close goes to Ms. Miller.
Thank you, Jean. And I want to thank the audience for attending this evening. Stamford and Darien need someone with experience who can hit the ground running from day one. Someone who knows how to navigate the process. Someone who will be open to new pragmatic ideas. Someone who will be a strong voice for the district. Despite the challenges of the crisis we face, there is also opportunity. I hope to use this opportunity to bring us together, to help our small businesses and put people back to work, and to create a brighter future for all residents. I would be honored to earn your vote on March the 2nd and be your next state senator. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Miller. Mr. Merlin.
Ultimately, as much as I'd love to beg for your votes, pander for votes, say whatever politicians say, my friends died because of Purdue Pharma. That is why I'm here. We need policies to save lives. We need legislature and those in charge to work about these policies in good faith and transparent ways. And we are losing far too many people in the drug war. There are disparities that are very uncomfortable for everybody when it comes to disparities in treatment, disparities in recovery, disparities in prosecutions. The drug war is inherently the teeth of white supremacy. And we need to do the right thing. We need to prosecute the Sackler family, the owners of Purdue Pharma, and we need to put our political differences aside on this issue. I promised my friend's mom at his funeral last year that I would fight like hell on this, and I'm not giving up. And I don't care if I lose 1,000 elections. I don't care if Colangelo arrests me for that recording. I don't give a damn.
Thank you. That's time. Thank you, Mr. Merlin. Mr. Esses.
State is at a crossroads. For virtually all of the last 3 decades, Democrats have controlled our state legislature. Taxes have increased, the cost of living has gone up, and our state retirement obligations have ballooned out of control. However, I know that we still have a bright future ahead if we can capitalize on the incredible resources our state has to offer and can take advantage of this unique moment in our nation's history. Now is the time to tell the world that Connecticut is open for business. It's open for families, and it's open if you want to live here and get a good education at a reasonable cost. We deserve a government that is worthy of its people, and we have not been getting that from Hartford. A vote for me is a vote for a new message from our state's capital, which says we are finally going to make hard adult decisions about what our government can do and what it cannot do. A vote for me is a vote for prosperity for every family in our state and our district. I'm asking you tonight for your vote on March 2nd. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Thank you, Mr. Esses. Now, on behalf of the League of Women Voters, I want to thank all 3 candidates and the members of the audience. And I only regret that we couldn't get to more of the questions, all of which were excellent. Ladies and gentlemen who are watching this, it is now up to you. Please vote. Thank you very much.